Welcome to a very special episode of Cosmic Road where we are joined by author Jeff Woolwine. Thank you for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jeff is the author of the Tucson Lights. He's been on the History Channel, and I'm very happy to talk about him about his UFO tracking experiences and other experiences. So, yeah, this should be a fun one. How did your career in tracking UFOs begin?
Wow. Okay. So we are going to step 20 years into the future when it comes to ufology. But for now, to understand the future, we must understand the past. So we're going to go into how I got all started in this. So I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been seeing these things in the sky ever since I was a kid. I can remember playing catch football outside my front yard, and there'd be a light in the sky. And I remember going, this is like in the fifth grade, and I remember going to a friend of mine, and I'm like, did you see that light last night? And he was a Native American boy. And he goes, yeah. He goes, my grandfather says those lights live in those mountains over there. And he points to the west side, to the White Tank Mountains. Well, growing up, you keep seeing these things in the sky. So, in 2004, the news did a segment on how the Phoenix lights were back. And so during my investigations, I knew that the east side was more UFO hotspot than the west side of Phoenix. So I went to the east side of South Mountain, and lo and behold, it didn't take very long. I saw these two orange amber lights just appear in front of us and kind of go west towards the mountain there. And in the whole summer of 2004, I'm recording lights over this major area, over this one spot. And this was going on for weeks, almost on a nightly basis. We'd go out there and we'd see these lights. And so I called the news. I'm like, "Hey, is anybody else seeing these lights?" I said, "I have tons of video of these things." And it took the news a few weeks to get back with me. And we did about maybe five news reports that summer, and the end result was we're all seeing flares 150 miles away in Tucson. And I'm like, no, these lights are right here, in the city. They're by South Mountain. And I was like, hey, you know what? Let's try to move because these things are like right there next to South Mountain on the east side of South Mountain. So I figured I'd move to the mountain and try to get a better view try to get a better angle on these lights. So in 2005, in January, I moved to South Mountain in Phoenix, and about a mile away. And lo and behold, the lights were gone. But now I'm seeing day stuff, and I'm seeing these black objects, these black orbs, and other strange things coming and going from South Mountain. This is in 2005. And so I go out there and trying to, I'm thinking spaceships, technology, some kind of evidence that a craft went down there. And lo and behold, what do I find? I find a boulder with a stick-figure man looking up at the exact same things that I filmed in the sky the day before in spirals. Now, prior to that, I remember seeing a Native American who worked at the Pueblo Indian Art Museum in downtown Phoenix. I remember him on Channel 8, seeing him up on South Mountain, and he's talking about the petroglyphs. And the guy that with him was saying, hey, this stick figure man looks like he's looking at something above his head. And he quickly turned around and says, yes, that's part of the interpretations here is that our ancestors saw and recorded things, in the places where the event took place at for future generations, to keep track on to remember by. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is 2004, and no one's talking about, here we have strange lights in the sky reported in March of 1997, and now we have strange markings out on the rocks here. There's got to be a connection here. No one has actually put two and two together yet with the things in the sky match to the rocks match to the carvings of the rocks of the mountains here. And so I remember seeing that on television. So I contacted the guy and I said, hey, I remember I saw you on television. You're talking about the petroglyphs. Can we go up on the mountain and talk about this? And he's like, yeah, sure, So we go up there, and he's talking about spiral doorways, and he's talking about lizard men and spirits of the earth and sky coming up out of the sand world. And not once is he talking spaceships or crafts or aliens, but he's talking spirits of the earth and sky. And one thing I found really fascinating is when he was talking about the spirals. He said the spirals are symbols for doorways into the underworld. He says when the spiral goes clockwise, it's a doorway in. When a spiral goes counterclockwise, it's a doorway out. He says when a spiral ends down, he goes 9 times out of 10, it's oriented to that crack in the stone of where the petroglyph is carved at on that boulder. He says that's the emergence points. That's the doorway to the underworld. He says when the spiral ends up, he goes, there's a vortex in the sky. I go, a vortex? He goes, yeah, it's like looking down into a tunnel. He goes, there's a vortex in the sky. And so, we spent like a few hours up on South Mountain, and he's talking about all these, different types of things. And, it's just not matching up to what we were led to believe, as far as spaceships, crafts, aliens from another planet. But he's talking about spirits of the earth and sky, saying that this is their home too, and all this other crazy things. And they're going down into the underworld. And when he points at that crack, I'm thinking, well, how can a mile wide V-shaped craft get into a little crack like that of the stone? It's impossible. How can a spaceship with technology get into a rock like that, go into a mountain? Until I actually saw this, until I actually witnessed this. And I saw this black object, and it seemed to come down into the mountain, and then it leaves from the mountain. And I soon realized that, this wasn't technology, because I was seeing a lot of them. And sometimes they would come off the mountain and come right over us. And these things were clearly alive. This was in 2005. And not only am I seeing them, I witness them, but I'm actually putting a new step into this, a new category. I'm actually matching it to the rock art. There was a crooked snake symbol looking thing that came off the mountain, and it was verified by the stone. It was the same exact kind of crooked snake that was carved on the mountains from the Hohokam people, the first Native Americans who first lived here over 1,000 years ago. And I'm recording the exact same thing. Well, from there, I took all that information to the news, and the news just ate it up, because this has never been done before. No one has actually successfully matched, UFOs to rock art. We think that it was we think that the Native Americans were carving UFOs, but up until this point, we actually proved it now. We're filming the same symbols in the sky that are carved on the rocks out there. And so when the news got rid of that, they just ate it up. This is a whole new topic on the Phoenix Lights. No one was talking about this before. This is a whole new theory, whole new concept. And at that same time, Pat Uskert was in town. He was working for the UFO Hunter show, UFO Hunter magazine. And at that time, he had this concept idea of where he would go around the country interviewing people who saw UFOs, and he had this new concept for a new show idea called UFO Road Trip. And he asked me if I'd like to be involved in the pilot, because back then in 2005 there were no UFO shows, Ancient Aliens or none of that stuff today. Back in that time, he asked me if I'd like to be a part of that. And I said, sure, yeah. So I ended up writing a 7-page article for UFO Magazine in 2005, talking about this new discovery, this new type of UFO, and the connections to the petroglyphs, and this new discovery of the Phoenix Lights, and all this other stuff that I've been working on for years. And he said, yeah, and so we went up on South Mountain, and I showed him the glyphs, and he's like, man, this is just some bizarre stuff. And I go, yeah, I know. It's just these things are alive, spaceships, aliens, technology. That's fine and gravy. I've seen some things that could resemble a craft. I've seen a flying triangle in the sky. I've seen flying kids jumping jacks flying over in the sky. So are those crafts? Could be. But what I'm filming out here is something different. These things are alive. When we're talking Quetzalcoatl, the flying serpent, I believe that's what we're dealing with here. These things are alive. They're in control of themselves. They know who's watching, who's not watching. And this is a technology. And so 2 years go by, and 2007, and that's when the UFO road trip turned into UFO Hunter Show. And so they were back in the valley, back in Phoenix, and they were getting ready to film an episode called Arizona Lights. And they had asked me if I would like to be a part of it, talking about the petroglyphs connected to the Phoenix Lights. And I said, sure, it'd be great. And so this is the very first time a show like this actually introduced rock art connected to UFOs and actually have the evidence. They showed the barbell that I found coming off South Mountain, and then they showed the barbell that's carved on the mountain from the Holocauns over 1,000 years ago. And that was the very first ever that this information was brought to the public on national TV. And when the producers later on, Pat Uskert, he tells me when the producers saw that episode, Arizona Lights, and saw my connections to the rock art, that actually influenced the Ancient Aliens TV show and many other TV shows. And so this work actually kickstarted all these other shows. And when I was out there, I was watching these things for over 3 years, coming and going from the mountain. And I noticed that there was a pattern to this. And when I was filming the Phoenix Lights in 2004, they were over a major area. They're over this power plant. And sometimes it was crazy. These lights would hover over this power plant, and sometimes steam would just be rising off these lights. And so I was kind of looking at the connections. Okay, so the lights are hanging around the mountain. These things are coming and going from the mountain. What's going on here? Why is this mountain so important? Why are these things attracted to this mountain? Well, it had everything to do with the fault line. And these things were actually, when the Native Americans say that they're going down into the underworld, they're actually going down into that to that energy spot. On a scientific analysis, they're going down to absorb this energy. And this is the reason why they were hanging over that power plant in 2004, because that power plant was bored down at the outskirts of that fault line, and so it was generating a lot of energy there. And so,
So you think they were going down into the ground to absorb electrical energy or some sort of
no,
esoteric energy? Or
not from the power plant. They would just hover over the power plant because the power plant was anchored to that fault line. But when in 2005, the lights were gone, and now we're seeing what now is called jellyfish. I had to wait over 20 years, all right, for people to catch up and start seeing these things, because no one else was seeing these jellyfish, these living creatures in the sky. This was never documented before. This was never seen before until, since the Hohokam Indians. So I had to wait over 20 years. And, in that study, they're going down into that fault line on a scientific analysis. They're going down into that energy.
so hang on. So the jellyfish that you're seeing, can you describe exactly the circumstances and what exactly you're looking at?
Holy cow. So these things are anthropomorphine. That's what the archaeologist likes to call these weird shapes and diagrams carved from the Hohokam Indians and from other tribes. They call them anthropomorphs because they're changing shape. They're anthropomorphine, and that's what these creatures were doing. They were changing shape. So sometimes it'd be a snake, and then other times it would transform into an orb, and then other times it would transform into a diamond, or it would keep that shape, a diamond, and then go into an orb and then come back to a diamond. But clearly these things was alive. And that's what was carved out here on the mountains, where a stick figure man looking up at flying snakes, flying orbs, things that wasn't natural, back in their time, and certainly isn't natural in our time.
And you think these things, whatever they were interacting with the fault line in some way
Yeah,
to absorb energy
absolutely,
from
absolutely.
within the earth. We're not talking about the power plant. We're talking about something else, some other form
Right,
of energy, whatever that would be.
right. They're going down into that energy under the mountain.
And you're
That's a
observing this with your naked eye, with the
Yeah,
camera. How are
right.
you observing this?
So every time I would see it first before anything. You have to see it first. And so I would see this object in the sky. I'd jump on my camera. I lived about a mile and a half away up on a third story or a second story apartment window, and I was overlooking the mountain. So I would see this orb. I'd jump on the camera and I'd see it go down on the mountain. And about maybe an hour or two, even sometimes a few days, they would not leave from the mountain, but they would leave in a different spot. When I go out there, what do I find? I find the stick figure man looking up at the exact same thing that I found and spirals, symbols for doorways. You see, the Native Americans, they've already documented all this for us before. This is what all these petroglyphs are talking about. They're prehistoric UFO sightings, and they've documented on the spots around these holy mountains on where and what to look for when it comes to these flying creatures. Am I saying crafts? Am I saying technology? No. These things are alive. These things are living beings, living creatures. And I've been saying that ever since I first discovered this in 2005, that this isn't this is something different, you
So,
know?
what kind of beings? There's the new idea out there of plasma beings. Do you think that is something like that? Is it other dimensional beings? Is it spiritual entities of some sort? What do you think we're looking at with these things?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I'm gonna I love archaeologists. I'm an amateur archaeologist, like 10 years prior to this. So I love history. And once I started looking at the Hohokams, who the Hohokam people were, what their petroglyphs were talking about, calling down a Native American shaman who worked at the Indian Museum in Phoenix, telling him, having him tell me the explanations on the symbols out here. It was all making sense on what was going on here. And I look at the 3 points of credibility here. One, we can read about these things from anywhere from 3 to 7,000 years ago, from old texts or carved scrolls or on rocks, if you will. And then we can come out on some of these mountains and we can see the photographs of what the texts are talking about. And now, three, we see them for our own eyes. This is where the 3 points of credibility is coming in, not hearsay. We don't, hearsay can take a holiday. We need to look at the evidence here. We need to look at the proof. And the proof is talking about what we read in some of these ancient scrolls, what we see for our own eyes, and what the petroglyphs are talking about carved over 1,000 years ago. Now, when you take all of this into consideration, when you examine what the petroglyphs are talking about, when you read about what some of these scrolls are talking about, it's biblical. It's all biblical. I don't like to throw religion. I'm not talking about religion, but when we look at this book as a type of history book for the world, it tells us what these things are. And now we have the petroglyphs. This has never been done before. We now have the petroglyphs are talking about what we are reading in these biblical scrolls, especially when it comes to giants. Oh yeah, I'm telling you, I found evidence of giants on South Mountain.
Let's
I
do it.
found I found evidence of tombs left by the Hohokam and the Mayans in South Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona. There's so much history there that has been covered up and buried and not talked about for 80 years. It's incredible. And it has everything to do with the Phoenix Lights and this new type of UFO that everyone's seeing in the skies today.
I love it, Jeff. That is awesome. Do you
Yeah,
think
thank
that
you.
the giants and the jellyfish are in any way related?
Holy cow. It tells us in these scrolls that that these things were thrown to earth. That's why I'm saying I don't believe they're from outer space. I believe they're from inner space. I believe this is their planet too. They've always been here. Just as the oceanographers has found new species of life below the ocean, this is a new species of life that has always been here. They've just been hiding. They've been dormant until man needs them once again to survive. Because look at some of the Indian stories, Indian myths and stories here. They tell us we're in the third, fourth. Some say we're in the fifth world. Every time the world changes, these things are here to help mankind establish and get set up again.
How do you think it relates to the ant people of Hopi legend?
Oh wow, that's crazy. So that's really cool. So the ant people, when I believe when it was like a big fire, on Earth, the ant people told the humans, come live with us, come stay with us. We're gonna help you. We're gonna save you. And then, but the problem with that, the humans ate up all their food. And when they got out of the when they came back on Earth, and now this is the reason why the ants don't have any food, and this is the reason why the ants have the skinny waist. And that was some of the interpretations from the Native Americans, some of the stories on why the ants have a skinny waist is because back in the day when the ant people told humans to come stay with them to help.
All right. Oh, we had a temporary internet blockage, but we are back. Ant people are skinny because humans were eating too much. Now, do you think that whatever those beings were, they're living underground in those areas, interacting with the same Native Americans that may have been putting up those petroglyphs? How could those ant people possibly be related to the jellyfish or whatever those beings are that are in the skies?
So I think that so these ant people that the Native Americans are talking about, there's no evidence of this. There's a lot of myths and stories and legends, but we really don't have any evidence. And I like to go with evidence. I like to go what we can prove. And even though it's like myths and stories, and there's a lot of myths and stories from the Native Americans, but you really have to ask yourself, where did these stories really originate from? It had to have came from somewhere, So maybe at one point in time, there was ant people, this and that. But I think right now what we're dealing with is something different. So some of the Native Americans, they tell us that these things come up out of the sand world, right? And they look like everyone else. They lose their tails, to look like everyone else. So that could be, one reference point. So these creatures, these beings like to mimic, if you will, they mimic humans. They mimic animals too. They mimic snakes. They mimic dogs. They mimic sheeps. I've seen an anthropomorph sheep in the sky, changing shape and changing colors. These things are wild, man. They're wild to watch. And they're wild to film, and it's something totally different than what we were led to believe all these years.
And so you have filmed these things and you have photographed them, and I assume there's photographs in your book, the Tucson Lights. Is that correct?
So I have. Well, technically, there's three books out. When I first discovered these anthropomorphs, these jellyfish, these new types of UFOs, and connecting the dots with the petroglyphs, that's when I made my first book, True Stories, Myths, Legends, and UFOs over Phoenix, that can be found on Amazon. And but I spent 15 years, on South Mountain investigating the mountain and putting together my first book. I'm crossing the T's, I'm dotting my I's, I'm making sure. I spent 15 years hiking South Mountain, discovering all this stuff, going to the Phoenix Library, digging up the history on South Mountain, and digging up the first park ranger, Charles Holbrook, from the 1930s, who talk about the holocom, who talk about the gold that's buried on South Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona, left by the Mayans. And there's a lot of history here that's been covered up. And like I said before, it has everything to do with the Phoenix Lights. It has everything to do with what we see in the skies today.
And when you say Phoenix Lights, you're not talking about the incident in 1997. You're talking about the Tucson Lights kind of phenomenon, right?
So the Phoenix Lights, that's the same stuff. All these lights are the same things. There's no evidence of anything flying over the city of Phoenix. All
There
we
are
have,
people that say they were under the
right?
thing
Yeah,
and they saw the shape in the sky,
yeah.
indicating there was a craft.
Right, but then again, we must go on what we have evidence of. There's no evidence of a spaceship. There's no evidence of a craft. As a matter of fact, the history show, Arizona Lights, they talk about this. No evidence of a craft ever, was filmed. All we have is four lights on the west side of Phoenix, and they're like in a boomerang, or like just like kind of like an arc between South Mountain and the Australia. No evidence of anything flying over the city of Phoenix. And why do we have those four videos? Well, because there were sky watchers at that time who were ready for these lights, because they were filming lights nights prior to March 13th, 1997. So they're one of the witnesses that actually filmed what really happened. So my point is, these sky watchers, they're out there looking for something. And so if anything reported a V-shaped, mild wide craft going 8 miles an hour over the city of Phoenix, they would have been on it, man. They would have been on it. But to this day, over 20 years, there's not one single video evidence of anything flying over the city of Phoenix. I have been studying this for years. Okay. There's no evidence of anything. Hearsay is fine. That's all great. We can't prove that. Well, we
Well,
can prove.
witness accounts may not be considered hearsay, but okay, well, just for argument's sake, let's say there's different phenomenon going on, that there
Sure.
are
Right.
potentially some structured craft, but
Right.
there's also this other element to it,
Exactly.
living
Exactly.
beings,
Yes.
whatever they are,
I
entities.
think I think we're dealing with two different types of things here. One is spaceships, technology, craftsmen of the world, and the other is a different type of entity, a different creature, if you will. So, like I said before, I seen a black triangle fly through the sky. It actually screamed and it echoed through the canyon walls of South Mountain. And when I actually saw like some jacks, those kids jumping jacks, four spheres connected together, going counterclockwise. Could that have been a craft? Sure. But what I think the majority of the public is seeing today, as far as orbs and lights and strange things in the sky, is something different. It's what the holocrons are talking about. It's what the Native Americans are talking about. Are they carving flying saucers? No, they're carving orbs. They're carving flying diamonds. They're carving flying serpents, things like this. No crafts, no aliens, something different.
That's fascinating, man. I love it. Okay. All right, so I kind of interrupted your flow earlier. All right,
That's
so
okay.
you got to the point where you're starting to accumulate this evidence, and where does your journey take you after that?
So, I mean, everything was fine, and so I'm going up on South Mountain, and I'm finding evidence of giants. I'm finding these huge walls, these huge brick stone, like stuff we find in Egypt. Huge walls on South Mountain, and they were buried. Some of it was buried, and I'm finding evidence of things that are buried there. And for a year, I'm exploring South Mountain, and I'm understanding the petroglyphs, and I'm seeing all this evidence. And so I'm like, you know what? Now it's time to go to the Phoenix Library. And so I went up to the government department, and I said, "Give me everything you have on South Mountain." And lo and behold, the lady comes out. I had to give him my ID. It was so important. They didn't want nobody to look at it. You had to give them your ID. And so the folder came out. I opened up the folder, and who's staring back at me but the first park ranger, Charles Holbrook, from the early 1930s all the way up until the 1940s. And he's talking about who the Hohokam people were and how the Mayans were in Phoenix, Arizona at that time also. And how did he learn all of this? It's because of the Native Americans at that time trusted Charles, and they told Charles exactly who the Hohokam people were, what happened to them, and what they left behind. And now it's his job to make sure that this sacred mountain is protected now because he's a park official now. So they told him the secret stories of South Mountain, and that included the gold left by the Mayans. And so even in his book, his son's book, he writes on how his father used to chase people away from South Mountain who were looking for the Mayan gold. And there was so much history in that folder. And after his death, that's when they made South Mountain a government park. That means you can't go up there and start digging up stuff. It's a huge government piece of land now. It's a government park. And why South Mountain? Why don't you make White Tank Mountains a government park? Why don't you make the Superstitions a government park? Why don't you make A Mountain? What's so special about South Mountain? Well, it's because there are things that are buried on South Mountain that's going to rewrite history, and it's going to take a whole 180 on this whole perspective on who the Hohokam people were and what actually happened in this valley and what the Phoenix Lights really is. So this is all buried. This is all covered up and wasn't talked about for 80 years until little old me comes around, starts digging in this file, and all the stuff that I was finding a year before, the evidence of giants and the tombs and sacrificing altars and Mayan petroglyphs, not Hohokam, but Mayan petroglyphs, just all this stuff was coming together in this folder. I believe everything happens for a reason. I don't believe
Okay,
anything is a coincidence. So this is where we're going with that.
I know this is probably all in your book, but can you give us a little teaser of some of that information, talking about giants and tombs and altars? Oh, what can you give us a little teaser of what that might contain?
So Charles Holbrook writes in his journals, that's located in the Phoenix Library in this folder, on how he talks on how the Mayans and the Hohokam people first arrived in this valley. And it wasn't a dried up landscape like it is today. There was actually evidence, there's evidence of waterfalls and water. It was a tropical like landscape back in the day. It wasn't a desert. And at that time they were performing sacrifice, all this stuff. And
Human or animal?
human. He writes in this journal that sometimes they were sacrificing uh enemies, captured enemies, and other things that we won't go into on this show today, but it's a little over the top. But yes, there was
Well, I've read
sacrificing
all
going on.
about the Aztecs. If they were anything like the Aztecs, then
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
pretty
Sacrificing
brutal.
children
Yeah.
and women, and yes, that's what was going on here. And so it's a completely different story on what we were led to believe. But the evidence is carved on the rocks. The evidence is from Charles Holbrook, the first park ranger. Now, Charles Holbrook, he wasn't just one guy, like a little small guy. I found evidence of Charles Holbrook, of files, of records that I can't even get into in California and Utah and New Mexico. So these files are locked up on this guy. So he was a very important guy. He just wasn't some, park ranger or park official. This guy he was authority, So someone like him coming out writing this paper, this journal, he used to hand out flyers. He used to take people on tours to talk about the petroglyphs. He had him this flyer. And what did he call? What did he call this land? The lost city of Cibola. What is Cibola? Part of the seven cities of gold. So he really thought that the Mayans were here, and the Aztecs and all these other people, and the Spanish conquistadors came to this area looking for part of that seven cities of gold, and he thought that South Mountain was one of them. As a matter of fact, there's a petroglyph on South Mountain East, and it's got the Spanish conquistador's name on there, and from like 1492 or something like that, And he actually had bars erected over that glyph. And there's still bars over that petroglyph marking the evidence that the Spaniards actually came into this valley looking for part of the seven cities of gold. Well, that's a whole new different type of topic history there. But yeah, so Charles Holbrook, he was a big guy. And for him to come in and write and start saying all this stuff on how the Mayans were here and there was sacrificing going on. And he says before the Hohokams left, because some of them left and then some of them kind of disappeared. We'll talk about that later if you like. Before they left, they buried all their gold in South Mountain. And Charles Holbrook writes, the gold was as tall as a saguaro cactus and as round as the sun. And they buried all that gold. And because they knew eventually the Mayans would have to come back and reuse this gold again. And so I guess I went a little further ahead of myself. So what happened to the Hohokam? So the Hohokam people, they lived here for roughly over 1,000 years, and the archaeologist wants us to believe, well, these people are just simply peace-loving people making pots and digging canals, and they were masters of the water canals and all this stuff. And then finally, they just disappeared because of drought. Okay, where'd they go? There's no evidence on where these people went. They were here for 1,000 years, and all of a sudden they just disappeared. Now, when you and I move, we take our belongings with us. But yet the Hohokams didn't. They left everything behind and simply vanished. Now, the oral tradition and what the rock art talks about what happened to the Hohokam people. What is the name of Hohokam? What does Hohokam mean? Hohokam was named by the Pimas. Now, the Pimas consider themselves ancestors to the Hohokam. I really think, in studying all of this, I really think that the Odom tribe is more in relations to the Hohokam, but the Pimas consider themselves ancestors to the Hohokam, so we'll give them that. And they're the ones that named them Hohokam. And Hohokam means the people who are missing, the people who got taken away, the people who are gone, because we don't know what happened to these people. Now, oral tradition, petroglyphs say that these things came down out of the sky and took these people away. They carried them off into the sky. This is what the petroglyphs are showing on South Mountain. These orbs, these flying serpents, these anthropomorphs, jellyfish are picking people up and taking them off into the sky.
Was
Now,
this a
why?
happy thing or was this a bad thing?
So, as I talked about before, they were sacrificing going on until one day, for reasons unknown, the sacrificing stopped. And when the sacrificing stopped, that's when all everything started to dry up. Everything started to die off. There was no food. There was no water. Everything's dying off. And the tribal people were yelling at their elders, why did you stop the sacrifice? Look, the gods are angry. We haven't seen them in the sky in months. Everything is drying up. Why did you stop the sacrifice? The gods are mad. They're angry with us. There's no water. Why did you stop that? And then some say that the devil came from the east and took these people away. And there were survivors to this Holocaust. And they were afraid and they ran into the caves and they saw the flying serpents. They saw the phoenix lights. They saw these orbs and things coming down and taking people up into the sky. Are we froze? I think we're froze. Okay.
No. I can see
Okay.
you. You're fine.
And they saw these things taking people up into the sky, and they vowed never to live in this valley again. They knew that if they were gonna continue to live in this valley of the sun, that eventually they would have to go back to war with these spirits of the earth and sky. So they buried all their gold. Charles Holbrook again writes that it was as tall as a swirl's cactus and as round as the sun, and they buried all their gold and these special items in South Mountain because one day they knew that they would have to return someday to fight off these evil beings or whatever it was. And they all returned back to Mexico and they cursed this land. They cursed the Valley of the Sun, what now is called Phoenix. They knew that if you're going to continue to live there, you were going to have to face these spirits of the earth and sky once again. And they were afraid, and rightly they should be. So for 400 years, nobody lived in that desert. Nobody lived in what now is called Phoenix, Arizona. There were tribes on the outskirts of the valley, and they saw the lights, and they saw the orbs, and they saw the flying serpents, and they were afraid because they knew what happened to their ancestors. And this was the story from generation upon generation upon generation and generation to generation. This is what's going on. And this is why this is kind of a taboo subject when some of these Native Americans that I've been talking to, some of these shamans and medicine men, sometimes they will tell you off camera, of course, and then other times they won't talk to you about this because this is a scary thing because they know what had happened to their ancestors last time they saw the lights in the sky, last time they saw these orbs in the sky, last time they saw these UAPs and these jellyfish, is something bad happens. And when we look at history and when we look at some of these myths and legends from the Native Americans, first, second, third world, these beings are always there. They're always there in the beginning to help mankind, guide them, and in the last time this happened, they gave them the secret knowledge. This is the reason why we find these huge pyramids out there and all these structures, and because these beings from the earth and sky taught mankind secret ways that mankind wasn't meant to know about. And then all of a sudden, see, that was their downfall. That's when these things. Is it a good thing that some got taken away and some didn't? I don't know. But the Native Americans who witnessed that at the time, they got the heck out of Dodge. They're gone, so, and that was the story of Phoenix until Jack Swelling came over the White Tank Mountains on the west side in the early 1800s, and he looked down and he saw all the canal systems and the Hohokam structures and everything, and he's like, wow, what an awesome place to build a city. The Indians left, and look, they built the canal force and everything, so we're going to restart. We're going to rebuild here. And that's where Phoenix got their name from, because it's the fiery bird that rose out from the ashes of the formal civilization. But they're not talking about who this formal civilization was. They're trying to make us believe, well, it's just a simple peace-loving people who were there for 1,000 years, and just it got too hot, so they went somewhere else. But we don't know what happened to them. But yet they left records, like ancient scrolls, like tattoos all around the mountains here on what happened to these people, on what happened in their lifetime, how they were seeing things in the sky also. But this went to another level. These things actually came down, made contact with people, and bore giants.
Okay, we've got to talk about the giants. But before we move on to that, I've got to ask you because we had been talking about human sacrifice and also people that were interacting with beings. So the obvious question is, are they sacrificing to the beings? And did the beings want them to sacrifice? Is there any evidence either way on that?
So a lot of legends and stories they say that like every equinox and every solstice, there's a ceremony and there's a sacrifice, to make sure that the corn and everything is good prospect, that the sun continues to orbit, that everything is still in motion. This is the reasons why the sacrificing was taking place. But when you really look at it all, it has everything to do with worshiping, and the blood, man's blood, being poured down the mountains of these holy mountains, or and things like that. So that's why I tend to think on all of
So you
this.
don't think it had anything to do necessarily with whatever beings were there that
Oh
may have
yeah, oh yeah. These beings, they wanted to sacrifice. They wanted
they
they
did. Okay, yeah,
they
yeah.
wanted the worshiping. Yeah.
Well, if they had a hand in any way in the pyramid culture, in erecting the pyramids, well, in the Americas, that's what they were for.
Here's
So
one thing that I found fascinating. I like to bring up. So in India, the India legends talk about these Vietnamese and how there was a war between the good Vietnamese and the bad Vietnamese, and humans was their trophies. And they say that they had these magical weapons and they were shooting at these bad entities, and humans was their prize. And obviously, the good entities won because we're not slaves to these bad entities anymore, and so the good entities kind of freed us. And but they buried their secret weapons in places around the earth because they know eventually they're going to have to come back and reuse these weapons to fight off these creatures again. And so when I looked at that story, and then I looked at a petroglyph that's on South Mountain, it has a stick figure being with 4 arms. Now, when we look at some of the India paintings, like some of the elephants, they have these many arms, right? All these crazy arms. And this petroglyph, it was a stick figure man with 4 arms, and he had a staff weapon, and he's shooting at a flying serpent, half man in the sky. And there's other Native Americans, depictions of Native Americans, actually bows and arrows shooting at the flying serpents and orbs in the sky. So there was a war that was going on here, and it was the petroglyphs is on South Mountain to this day. So when I looked at the Viamati story, and then when I looked at what's carved there, it fits. There was a
wow.
war. There was a war. The humans, the Native Americans, the people back then did go to war with the spirits of the earth and sky,
And do you think
according to the
they are
petroglyphs.
spirits, or do you see them as celestial beings, or what are the spirits of the earth and sky to
So
you?
here's what I'm I, everything when I first got into this, I had no idea what I was about to uncover, and I was just going off what everybody else is saying, aliens, spaceships from another planet. But when I was researching all this stuff for when I was, researching these things and actually seeing them, for my own eyes all these years, and understanding the petroglyphs and what the holocoms and say is all about it, and then what some of these scrolls are telling us, I understand why they call these things spirits, because when they come out of the sky, they're solid. Right. And right before they go into the mountain, yes, I said into, they're not landing on the mountain, they're going in the mountain. And before they do that, you can see through them. They're like a ghost. And then they absorb themselves into the rock. Same thing when they come out of the rock. They're coming out of the mountain, and they're like a ghost. They can see through them. As they get higher up, they become more solid and more shape shifting and more changing colors, and they just drift up into the sky. And so there's a lot of petroglyphs depicting this also. As a matter of fact, there's a symbol of a doorway, and this lizard is coming out of this doorway. But first, he's a spirit form. And how they carved that spirit is they made him like a ghost. All right, so he's coming out of the spiral, and he's a ghost, and then he becomes more solid as he gets further and further away from the doorway. And that's basically what's going on here. When they come down on the mountain, you can see through them. They're like a spirit. They go on the mountain. Same when they come out of the mountain, they're a spirit, and then they get solid and they travel on.
So what are they?
I really think. Well, I mean,
I know
so
you know all the answers, Jeff. So tell me.
well, when you start talking about some of these ancient scrolls and things like that, people are like, "Oh, you're talking about religion, dude." Yeah, I'm not talking about religion, man. Look, the scrolls talk about how these things were thrown out of the sky, was thrown out of heaven and cast here on the earth. It tells us that when these things came to the mountain, of course, in these scrolls it says Mount Hermon, but Mount Hermon wasn't the only mountain that these things were thrown on. South Mountain, mountains here in Tucson, the West Coast, all the mountains around all these sacred mountains around the earth. These things were thrown upon, and this is their home too. These mountains are their place of residence, if you will. This is where the energy is. So when you take all that consideration, and then when you go out on the petroglyphs and you see the stories of like I said before, we can read about them in these 7,000-year-old texts, and then we can see the prehistoric photographs of what they're talking about. It all fits, and now we see them for our own eyes. It all comes together. This is where the evidence is. This is where the credibility consists at. Okay. These things have always been here. They're not from outer space. They're from inner space. They've always been among us, and they only come out. Well, some stories say when mankind gets too noisy, that's when it disturbs these things, and these things come out. So it's only natural. Like look at World War II. We had these Foo Fighters running around, these light orbs. I mean, come on. So they're waiting. They're watchers in the sky right now. They're waiting for mankind to need them once again to survive. So they're basically waiting, all right, until something happens where mankind needs them once again, because right now we don't need them. All right. If one came down and said, "Hey, it'd be great. It'd be front page news for like maybe a week," but people have to go back to work and school and they got their life going on. We don't need them right now. So they're just simply watching and waiting, because the only person that really knows the future is the supreme being, the great spirit. Okay. He knows when everything is going to happen. Right. But all these other creatures, these other beings, just like us, we can see the prophecies coming into play here. We can see on how things are escalating to the point where it's going to happen again, and the world's changing. Look at that. The world is changing. All right. We're about ready to enter the fifth world. And what happens when we enter that world? We're going to need help. These things are going to be here once again. They're going to see them. They're going to deal with
I don't
mankind.
know. I don't know if I want their help. I don't know if I want to get
Exactly
to.
right.
I don't know if I
So
want to
I
get to the.
know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And this is what the people who know about these things are not telling us, who are trying to hide from us. Okay, this is the reason why they want us to believe and all this other crazy stuff, but is avoiding what's really here. At least they're getting closer. Now they used to call them UFOs. Now they're calling them UAPs. Okay, well, they're getting closer. All right. And they're saying there's no evidence of crafts, but there is something here. Oh, wow, you're getting closer. It's not a craft. It's a living creature. It's a living being. Okay. And they're scary. Okay. I've seen some things coming and going from South Mountain from my own eyes that would just knock your socks off. This is the reason why they're not talking about this. If it was aliens technology from another planet, we would accept that, because we build spaceships, we build technology, we go to other worlds. We can accept that. But if they actually come out and says, "Hey, guess what, you guys? There's creatures, right, that can go into a mountain, right, and absorb it, and they fly and they change and they shapeshift. Oh, and guess what? They could have had something to do with taking away the Hohokam people. Oh, not only the Hohokam, but all the other tribes around the world that disappeared at the same time. They might have had something to do with that. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, how many people would actually stay in that valley if they actually knew, and if they suspected, and if they thought that the Phoenix Lights and these things that we see in the skies today has something to do with mankind's downfall over 1,000 years ago? See, and that's the crazy part of it all. That's what they're trying to cover up. All right. But more and more of these things are here. And it's only a matter, and the evidence, man, the petroglyphs are talking about the history of these things. So I think we need to take a second look at these petroglyphs and stop looking at them as just a myth and story and graffiti, but actually look at them as a story and a history that they're telling us what these beings are, what happened to them. Okay. It's a warning sign. They're telling us with their rock art. Yes, they had language back then, but the holy people took that away years ago. So they're not allowed to write anymore. They can draw now. They can draw. And they're telling us they saw giants. They dealt with giants. They dealt with orbs in the sky. They dealt with flying serpents. They dealt with sacrifice.
Well, that is really alarming.
It is. It is. And this is something that you're not going to find, anyone else was talking about this, right? For one, because it's been buried for longest time and no one's talked about this until little old me come around and was doing my nosy investigation work, and I'm looking at the big picture here, right? And it's all starting to make sense.
Okay, in recent years, there's been various pieces of evidence that have come out to support what you're saying. Obviously, I'm
Absolutely.
sure you're familiar with Skywatcher and the jellyfish that they're getting in the sky, and
Yeah.
that seem to be like living beings and stuff.
Hmm.
As
See,
the
I was the
secret.
first one to discover this in 2005. And, Pat Usgard, he admitted to that. He's like, we know that, it matched the rock art. We know this is another creature. It's not a spaceship, but Jeff, it's bizarre. He's like, no one's seeing this yet. It's bizarre stuff. No one is seeing this. We're just going to have to wait. I had to wait over 20 years for people to start seeing these jellyfish. That's why I was saying in the beginning, we're going to go 20 years in the future here because now they're not even talking about the fault lines. They're not even talking about UFOs over power plants. All right, they're not talking about oh, what if these things are spirits, and actually what if they're from inner space, not outer space. What if they live here too. What if it's a completely different completely different theory here, a completely different idea. All right? And I've been saying this ever since 2005 when I first discovered this. So in a way, I am the original source to all these new discoveries.
Have you been in touch with Skywatcher?
So I email people, but no one gets back to me. So
Okay, well, I hope
and
that changes. I hope that changes. Now,
yeah, thank
Secret to Skinwalker Ranch, they have a great clip where they show a UFO entering the mesa
hmm
and exiting the mesa,
hmm
like you're saying, they're coming and going from the
hmm
solid rock.
yeah,
So,
and see that Skinwalker Ranch, they're just in the flight path. Okay, it's the canyon about a mile away. That's the doorway. That's where all the petroglyphs are. That's where those things are interested in. Not Skinwalker Ranch, but the petroglyphs on the canyon over there, because that is where the energy is.
okay, now it's really fascinating you say that because George Knapp and his co-authors in the book The Skinwalkers at the Pentagon said they were seeing skinwalkers so often they could track their migration patterns.
Mhm.
He didn't expand on that at all, didn't expound on that at all. I have no idea what he meant, but that kind of goes with what you're saying. Maybe they're coming and going from this particular location you're
You're
talking
right.
about.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's
Oh, okay.
season.
All right. We've teased the Giants long enough, Jeff. All right.
Oh, back to the
Let's,
Giants.
let's talk about the Giants. Okay.
So everyone, there's evidence of giants out there. It's in my first book, and the two stories of the covered up history of Phoenix, Arizona. That's in there. Two stories, myths and legends. There's evidence of giants in that, um, and there's petroglyphs of carvings of giants. And one thing that I found fascinating, and I learned this from the Native American who was teaching me the glyphs from the Pueblo Indian Art Museum. Um, we're all familiar with the Superstition Mountains. We're all looking for the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, but history tells us a different story about that mountain. The Native Americans, they say that when the flood was coming to wipe out all these bloodthirsty giants, the giants didn't want other giants to drown. So the main giant told his people to come up on this huge stone. And the lead giant used his powers to raise this mountain up, but the water kept coming. And he used his powers again to raise this mountain up, but the water kept coming. He used his powers so much, but by then it was as huge as a mountain, but the water was still coming. And in his last bit of strength, because he didn't want his people to drown, he turned them all to stone. And when he did that, that's when the biblical flood stopped. And to this day, you can look upon the Superstition Mountains and you can see the water line where the biblical flood had stopped. And a little bit up higher, you can still see those giants turned to stone up there on the mountains. And then the one giant is down on the bottom of the mountain, and he's like in a praying position.
Have you seen any of this?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a stone giant on Camelback Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona. He's up on the mountain and he's turned to stone. So
Where can we go to find pictures of these or videos?
So you can find me on my Facebook page, Chef Woolwine, Petroglyphs in the Sky. There's all kinds of photographs in my book. The first book, True Stories, Myths, Legends, and UFOs over Phoenix, Petroglyphs in the Sky, Phoenix Lights. You can find that in my first book and my second book. My third book, the Tucson Lights. That's a little bit different. But yeah, all the photographs, all the information. You could probably even search my name, and photographs of some of the stuff that I found is on the internet already.
All right, so you have actually become a tracker of UFOs, and
Right.
you took my buddy Dennis out the other day, and y'all
Yeah.
saw some amazing stuff in the sky, and he shared those
Yeah.
videos with me.
Yeah.
And he's the one who encoured me to talk to you, and I'm so glad he did because
Thank you.
this
Yeah.
is super fascinating.
Thank you so much.
I may have to have you come back on the show because I can tell there's a lot that we
Oh yeah.
haven't explored. And I think you told me that you were an experiencer of some sort yourself, or you had some sort of interaction with the lights or the beings themselves, or something like that.
Well, um, so like I said before, I've seen these things ever since I was a kid. So this is I guess my destiny. I don't believe anything is a coincidence. I believe everything happens for a reason. So we are meant to be talking about this. We're meant to get this information out. Um, but as far as I don't know what you mean by that. You have to explain to me a little bit
Okay,
more.
okay. Well, Dennis gave me a hint there. I'll have to
Okay.
follow up with Dennis and find out exactly what he
if,
meant.
if you think that I talk to these things and all this other stuff, no, I don't do that. But there are times where hey, let's go outside, and there'll be one in the sky. So I really think that
Okay,
these
so
things.
back that up a little bit. Back that up. Okay, so you have a feeling there's going to be something there, and it's there.
And I think these things know what's going to happen before it happens. So they know who's watching and who's not. This is how they're getting away with being in our skies. And that's what's going on here in Tucson. If you're ready to talk about that.
Yeah, so you moved from Phoenix to Tucson at some point. Can you tell us about that? And yeah, well, what you found in Tucson?
Right. So, after we was in Phoenix investigating South Mountain, just Phoenix has gotten so crazy. There's so many people there, so it was just time to leave. So we went to Tucson, and just trying to get away from the crime and the hustle and bustle and all the traffic. And Tucson seemed to be, the area. So we've been here about 4 or 5 years now. And the first couple of years, we'd see something in the sky. I wasn't living next to this mountain. We'd see something in the sky, this and that. There wasn't anything like South Mountain. Wasn't anything like Phoenix. No anthropomorphs, no jellyfish, no creatures. We might see an orb, this and that. But things really didn't escalate until like maybe 2.5 years ago. So I was living by the mountain over there, and I'm looking towards the Catalina. I'm looking north. That's this mountain right here behind me. And that's the Catalina. So it goes the Catalina, then it goes Mount Bigelow, and then it goes Mount Lemmon. Why that mountain has three names, I have no idea. But that's the way they seem to name it all. To me, it's all just one mountain, but they sectioned it off for some reason. I don't know. So I live by the mountain and on the west side. And every once in a while, we'd see an orb fly over the apartment and go on the mountain, or we'd see one leave. So I knew it was active. Every once in a while, we'd see some air traffic out there. We can talk about that a little bit later. And but it wasn't nothing major until May 10th of last year. And what happened? What happened in May of 2024? Well, we had a solar flare. And this is when science comes into play. See, some of these other ufologists, they're not talking about the science of it all. We are going to talk about this today. We're, like I said, we are 20 years ahead of ufologists here. So buckle up. Let's get ready. So what happened in May? We had this solar flare. And the only way that we could see the aurora lights, the northern lights here in Tucson, was to take a photograph. And then you look back at the photograph, and we could see the lights over the mountain there, over the North Mountain. So my wife is out there taking photographs, and I'm looking at the photographs, and we see the aurora lights, and it's really pretty. But there's little white specks in there, little white dots. I'm like, what are those white dots in there? So that's when I got the night vision out, and I started looking, and lo and behold, I'm seeing these white orbs coming out of the sky, going down on the mountain, flying across. They're flying in the northern lights. They're flying all over that mountain, right in that area. And I'm like, holy cow, I must have filmed about 150 of them that night. It was just crazy. All these white orbs flying in that pattern there. Well, I was in the process of moving. All right. And so I couldn't sit there and watch the next night because I had to pack up all my equipment and we moved. And lo and behold, like again, I don't believe anything is coincidence. I believe everything happens for a reason. So now I'm sitting over here. I'm in the middle of this mountain now. I can see all of the mountain, and now I can see the east of the mountain called the Recon Mountains. I can see both these mountains now. Not thinking that those lights are still here, because that's, we only had that pattern in 2004 when those Phoenix lights was hanging over the power plant. That's when I was seeing them almost every night, but I wasn't expecting to see them here, until lo and behold, we're sitting out on our balcony, we're looking on the mountain, and I see this white bright of light. I'm like, no way, but they moved because now they're like in the middle of the mountain now. So within like a 2-month period, they went from the west side of the mountain. Now they're in the middle of the mountain. And when I brought out the night vision, boom, there they are. They're right in front of us again. And now I'm closer to the mountain. And it was crazy. And so the next night, I was like, there's just no way they're going to be back. They were. They came back. They were there every night of last summer. And so I tracked them. From May, June, July, August, September, all the way out until December, when we're going to have that equinox or the solstice, right? December, at the end of the seasons. I tracked them way out of Tucson and they were coming in at different times. So in May, they were coming in at midnight. And then in July, they were coming in at 1. And then in August at 2. And it was like a pattern here. And they were only there for an hour. And each month, they were coming in about an hour later than they were before. So by the time it got December, they were clear past this mountain, way on the other side of Tucson. And I chased them all the way out there at 3 o'clock in the morning. All right. And I documented this. I'm like, hey, those lights should be here at this mountain. And they were. Okay. So, and I had a feeling because when I was watching these anthropomorphs, these shapeshifters, these jellyfish, for 3 years at South Mountain, it seemed to be a pattern here. Some months they were there, some months they were gone, some months they came back. And I noticed that it was a pattern of the sun, the equinox and the solstice. And the holocoms, they marked these things out. They tracked this. They were skywatchers too, and they tracked the sun also. This is the reason why we have spirals and shadows casting these shadows through these spirals up into the stem. And the archaeologists, they want us to believe, well, it's time to plant corn. It's telling the Indians that it's the changing of the seasons. It's time to plant corn. It has nothing to do with changing planting corn. It has everything to do when these light beings, when these creatures are going to visit this mountain again. And that's the reason why it's cutting through the spiral doorway, going into the stone, into the underworld, is because they're telling us, and they show you what to look for. And it was different. It was weird too, because like on this side of the mountain, there was the flying serpents, on carvings of flying serpents. About a mile radius down from the mountain, we have flying orbs. And then another mile or two down the mountain, we have flying diamonds. Then another 2 miles down so it was different doors for different entities, different creatures, right? Different jellyfish, if you will, and different seasons. So January, February, March, man, those things are crazy. And then after that equinox or the solstice, they seem to be gone. And then after that, after the changing of the seasons, maybe one, maybe two, but then the solstice would come back, and then holy cow, they're back. So they were watching the sun, and to me, it really looked like when the sun would move positions over this fault line, over this area of this mountain where the energy was being collected at, it was opening up these doorways for these beings, and it was attracting these beings to this area. And then when the seasons would change, the beings would go somewhere else. They're following the sun, they're tracking the sun. But when the sun came back into this rotation again, when the sun came aligned again with these fault lines, these energy patterns, that's when these creatures came back. So I was expecting, because it was weird, I was like, okay, so it's 2024. All right, I'm seeing the lights. So in 2004, I'm seeing the Phoenix lights, right? And then in 2005, I'm seeing the jellyfish. So I was thinking in 2025, I was going to start seeing the jellyfish over the mountain, right? Nothing, nothing. To this day, no anthropomorphs, no jellyfish, no orbs, nothing is coming during the day from that mountain until, because I was thinking, they're going to be back in January. The orbs were back in January, but this time they didn't start on the May side, all right? Because I marked every canyon behind Mount Lemmon was the doorway for each month for these beings. Man, it was crazy. Each doorway was the month. There, because when you look on Google Earth and you see these huge canyons behind Mount Lemmon, behind this mountain behind me there's doorways, there's canyons. The Indians call them doorways for the spirits. And it was months. And so I was expecting to see them, back over here, but they didn't. They came back over here. They're on the east side now. Okay. And from there, they went to the recons. They migrated east. Now, some were coming and going from Mount Lemmon, but when it came to the recons, I was only seeing them, going in the mountain or flying over the mountain. I never see them coming out of the mountain until March. That's when I noticed that they're coming on the west side of Tucson. They moved in March over to the west mountains called the Tucson Mountains. And so I tracked them. It went from January, February, March, April, May. It came right back again to May, where I started filming them May 10th of last year. They're right back. They made a complete circle within a year's time frame, all right, around Tucson. And now in 2025, they're back in the same spot. But then again, hold the phone, folks. What happened? What happened in May again? We had another solar storm. We had another solar flare up. And what happened on that? Because in 2024, they're just flying over the mountain. None of them was going over the city. They're concentrated on the backside of the mountain. But now, after that solar storm, holy cow, they're flying from the Tucson Mountains and they're going over the valley now. They're going over Tucson. They're still keeping that pattern, right? They're still with the energy flow here, but now they're migrating. They're coming over. They're leaving from the west and they're heading southeast. And some of them are still going over the mountain there, but some of them are also coming this way. And so the pattern has changed. They still in that energy grid pattern where they're still following May, June, July, August. They're still doing that. But now they're mostly concentrating from the Tucson Mountains west, and they're coming over. They're staying in that grid, and then by 9 o'clock, and then up until like 12 o'clock, then they'll end. And then the next month, 1 o'clock from 9 till 1, and then 9 till 2. All right. So they're still following that energy grid. This hasn't been documented since the Hohokam Indians. This is the Einstein of ufology here. Okay. This is all scientific, right? When the sun, and another thing too, they're going from west to east. Some of them are crisscrossing in the sky, but they're migrating from west to east. Why is that? Why are they going from west to east? Why aren't they going from east to west? Why don't they go south to north? What's so important? From west to east every night. They're following what? Well, it's because of the rotation of the sun, with the rotation of the earth. Excuse me. The earth is going counterclockwise around the sun, and they're following the pattern of the earth. They're in cahoots with the earth. You see what I'm going with that? So they're going counterclockwise with the Earth as it rotates around the sun, going clockwise. It's
And
scientific
okay, why are they doing this?
because of the energy. Because and they get bright, right? They get bright right over these certain areas, and then they get dim. Well, that's where the energy is concentrating at that certain time. And then the next hour, the energy changes, right? The energy pattern changes over here now. So now they're getting bright over here for an hour. The next hour, they're getting brighter over here. The next hour, they're getting brighter over here. And then by the time they reach this month, that's the end. And it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're gone. And then the next night, they repeat itself. Every
Oh,
night they're here.
okay, so these are beings that feed on the Earth's energy as it revolves, and they change their patterns accordingly to,
Yeah.
are they intelligent? Are they animals?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They know who's watching, who's not watching. Like I said before, like when I was at South Mountain, they were dancing in front. They clearly wanted me to see them. They knew
Yeah.
I was coming. They were flying from the mountain over my apartment. They wanted me to see them. And yeah, they're intelligence, and that's why I said in the beginning,
Well, because
they
there's this
know who's
question with
watching.
Skywatcher, these beings that come when you call them, like an animal would, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, they're very anomalous, and so I don't know. It's fascinating,
Right.
and you've been able to see them for years, and they'll put on shows for you. They seem like they're deliberately, consciously interacting with you specifically.
I don't know about that. I don't want to go that way. I want to go look. So I didn't know any of this. Okay, this is all personal experiences, right? This is what I have found out through my 25 years of research. All right, how to see him, where to see him, because I have people coming to me all the time. Jeff, I was on South Mountain, but I didn't see anything. Okay, what month did you go? What time did you go? Because there's a pattern. All right, when you go out there at January at 5 o'clock, you're probably going to see one. You go out there in January at 12 o'clock, you probably won't see them. You go out there in January in the morning at sunrise, you're probably going to see one. You go out there, in between those times, you probably ain't going to see one. You go out there around sunset, you're probably going to see them. See, this is a pattern here. No one knew about this. No one knew about this pattern, and it is a pattern. It's a pattern of the sun and the energy and what times these things show up. So I didn't know any of this until my years of research. And so I just say, look, if you know how to look for them, if you know where to go to see them, you're going to see them. I'm not special. I just know where to look. I've done my research, all right? And I'm bringing my research to you, to the public, so you can go do what I have done, because that's the whole point of this whole research, all right? If I can do it, so can you. I'm not special, dude. Those things are special. We need to go see those things. We need to understand when they're going to be, where they're at, and what they are, and what's the future. Because to understand the future, we must understand the past. What does the past tell us about these things? We just went over it. It's not good. This is the reason why these airplanes and helicopters that we haven't talked about yet is not talking about these things. All right. And the news isn't coming. I've been trying to contact the news here for over a year. No, they're not getting back to me. I'm going to mail them a book one of these days. Okay. But you know what? I'm going to go to this Tucson City Council, and I'm going to ask them, what is up with all these crazy orbs? As it stands today, if they were only here for 30 of them at a point, I have over 5,000 sightings of these things. Every night they are visiting Tucson, Arizona. And yes, there are somebody else you can see them in my videos. There's somebody else watching these things. Now, let's go back a little bit. In 2004, okay, I noticed that there's airplanes hovering a few miles up from that power plant on the east side of South Mountain on Ray Road. Those of you who are familiar with Phoenix, that power plant is on South Mountain, is by South Mountain. That's one of the places where to see the Phoenix lights, because of that power plant. So those helicopters was up there. When the lights would come in, here come the airplanes. And at first I'm like, oh wow, cool. Someone else is documenting, someone else is watching this. This is great. I'm not the only one seeing these. These airplanes are seeing them too. Wow, that's great. Then these airplanes, they zoom in after these lights, right? And I'm like, okay, what's gonna happen now? Well, when the airplanes get really close, the lights disappear, right? Airplanes come in and they circle that area, and then the airplanes go up and they wait. here come the lights, and it's just a cat and mouse game, the whole area. And I soon realized that they wasn't there to watch him or investigate him. They were there to get him out of the area. They didn't want people to notice him over the power plant. They didn't want people to see these things. So as a deterrent, and sometimes it would work, they'd go after these lights. The lights would disappear. Sometimes the lights wouldn't. Sometimes the lights were staying there and the airplanes would just circle around and then go off because they knew the lights weren't going away. But most of the time they would disappear. Now, when I went to South Mountain in 2005, and I'm starting to see these new UFOs, now I'm dealing with not only airplanes, but black helicopters. Okay, so that first year, I've just watching them coming and going. I've noticed where all the doorways were. Most of the so I concentrated on all those doorways. All right, and when the flying serpent came out of South Mountain and I filmed it and I documented the petroglyph panel, I took that to the news. Now that happened early in the morning. I was the only one that knew what canyon that flying serpent came out of. But the next day, after that sighting made the news and the connection with the petroglyph made the news, the black helicopter came in. And where did he go? He went right to that canyon, right? And then he went to this doorway, to that doorway, to this doorway, to that doorway. And then he showed me some other doorways that I had no idea about. And then he went right back to that mountain. He went 3 times to that doorway where I saw that flying serpent out. How did he know? I was the only one that saw that serpent come out of that canyon. But yet I filmed them. I filmed that helicopter. And once I was making the news, those helicopters were flying over my apartment. They were flying right in front of me, right there. They do this. They're watching me now too. Now. Some of the airplanes would fly over. That first time when I was making the news in 2004, the Phoenix lights, man, those airplanes that hover over my apartment, I could hear them, and they'd follow us all the way to Mason Community College, where I'd set up my tripods and my cameras to watch the lights over the power plant. Those airplanes would follow us, and they'd follow us home too, And same thing that was going on in South Mountain too, because I was living right there. But those airplanes and those helicopters knew where I was living at. They would hover, like miles in front of my apartment from the mountain there. Same thing that's going on here in Tucson now, right? So there's an airplane that likes to circle around now, okay? And he's looking for these lights. And whenever these lights start to show up, he kind of zooms in after them. And there's so many videos of the airplanes either chasing the lights away or the lights chasing the airplane away. But one thing I really want to stress on, this is fascinating. So right over my shoulder here, you notice how the mountain dips down, okay? That's the west end doorway to the Catalina Mountains. So there are houses right there, some beautiful mansions, big, huge houses facing west in that little cubby hole there, in that little canyon right there where that mountain is. And these lights are coming from the west of the west end mountains, west of Tucson, the Tucson mountains, and flying over the city and going right in to that doorway there. I call it the west end doorway of the Catalina Mountains. They're going in that doorway. But there's houses there, man. I've been there. It's in my book. There's major houses there. And what these helicopters do is they fly over the mountain, and they know when something's going to happen. It's so weird. They know when these lights are going to be there before they get there, because here comes the helicopters, man. They're flying over the mountain. They fly over the mountain, and then they sit right here, okay? And they wait, okay? And then the lights come out of the west, and they start to head towards that area, but that helicopter is right in their way. So what do? Instead of going into the mountain, the helicopter is forcing them going up and over the mountain instead of going in the mountain, because they don't want those people to look up and see that huge light going over their house into this mountain, into the mountain behind them. Okay, so it's a distraction. It's a way of getting those lights away from there. There's so many times I videotaped these lights going in that side of the mountain there.
But where can people go to find these videos of yours? Well,
oh my gosh,
YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, you can find me on the Phoenix Lights Petroglyphs in the Sky. It's all one word. Jeff Woolwine, the Phoenix Lights Petroglyphs in the Sky. I have so many videos of those things now. I'm filming them almost on a nightly basis. Some nights I'm able to get out there, some nights I'm not, but I'm always tracking them. And I'm fascinated. What's going to happen now? You know, how far are they gonna? They're continuing the pattern. They're still doing that pattern, but we're having more solar storms. All right, and as long as these solar storms is beating, as long as the sun is shooting down these ions and electrons and these neutrons, all this energy particles, that's what these things are after. Okay, it's like Pac-Man going after those power pellets, right? When they get to those power pellets, they get real bright. They're sucking up that energy that's right there. These things are able to harness and control, and I don't know about control, but they're able to harness and to absorb the energy that man isn't able to see it, isn't able to grasp. There's no comprehension of this yet. This is why we're 20 years ahead of
Are we talking
ufologists.
chi? Are we talking element 15? Are we talking about 0 point energy? What do you
So we're
think
talking
the
ions and electrons and all the energy particles from the sun
so
that's
something
being
more, scientific?
right, that's being thrown down on the earth. So when you throw all these particles, all these energy particles at this energy mountain, not only with the fault line, but now all these solar storms, there's tons of energy here. It's like an intergalactic gas station here in Tucson for these light orbs. Okay. And you know what? So I, for over 2 years now, for 2 years, I have, even since I've been living here in Tucson for 4 years, I haven't seen any jellyfish. And in South Mountain in 2005, I knew that mountain was active with jellyfish, this new type of UFO, because of the airplanes was monitoring what's going on. The helicopters was always over that mountain, high up, so they can't be noticed. But someone like me who's looking and understands what they're doing up there, I'm seeing them. All right. So, and I know that there's no jellyfish here in Tucson. There's no new UFO in Tucson because of the air traffic, because of the airline activity. There's no black helicopters hanging around the mountain. There's no airplanes hanging around until the sun goes down. That's when the fleets come in, all right, and they're looking for these orbs, and they want these orbs to get. There's nothing they can do but sit there and watch and try to deter them from going in the mountain, from other people seeing them. But as long as the sun continues to throw all these particles at us, more and more is coming, man. And I write about this in my book. I wrote about this last year. I was like, you know what? They're following this pattern, but I think when there's going to be so much of them, so many of them here, they're going to stop the pattern and they're just going to be flying over the city. And that's exactly what happened in 2025 this year.
Jeff, this is super fascinating. I
I
love this.
know
This
it's
is
crazy, isn't
this
it?
has been the
This
best
is all
discussion.
first-hand experience for 25 years of research on what's really going on here. Not hearsay, but just personal experiences, and now we're putting the scientific equation into this, Um, well, I think it's not just happening here; it's happening all over the world. Because the solar flares, it's things are really going on here. If someone wants to look for UFOs, I suggest that you start with the history of where you live at. What does the Native Americans have to say about the land that you're living at? What mountain has the spiral anthropomorph carvings on it? If you find spirals and anthropomorphs, that's the source. That's the area where these things are drawn to. There's other petroglyphs out there, other mountains, and they're talking about hunting and gathering. They're talking about ceremonies. It's spiral doorways and anthropomorphs that you want to look for to start UFO hunting at. Um, this is what's going on here. It has everything to do with the energy and the sun and the fault lines. And all of this has been documented before by the Native Americans. So I think we need to really start paying attention to these petroglyphs and start, looking at them as a testimony. They're prehistoric photographs of what happened right there at the place of where it took place at. So where this carving is carved at, that's the location, because when you move that petroglyph, you're moving the history. You're taking the history away from that area. This is the reason why we find petroglyphs here, but we don't find any petroglyphs over there, because nothing happened over there. It happened here. And another way to to understand these petroglyphs is a lot of petroglyphs, sometimes we have to look up, right? We have to look up on these canyons to see these glyphs. Well, because the artist wants you have to look at the whole landscape, okay? The artist wants you to look up because he's telling you, hey, I saw something in the sky, so what better way to carve it in the sky on the location of where it took place at? And it's going to be a mountain. So he carved it high up. So when you look up, you see a guy looking up at a flying snake right in that area, right? And spiral doorways right there in the sky, So that's one way to look at, to understand the petroglyphs, is you have to look at the whole landscape. To get a hold of me at Facebook, Jeff Woolwine. Find me on Amazon. Just search my name on Amazon. You can find my books there. And my YouTube channel, The Phoenix Lights, Petroglyphs in the Sky.
Man, Jeff, this has been awesome. I want to go to Tucson and find some jellyfish with you. I mean, this is
Yeah, come join us. Come join us because we go out there and I know exactly when these things show up and where to look at, and they're here now. So if you want to come and see them, you're more than welcome to.
all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I hope you
Thank
come
you,
on
sir.
again.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.